It only happens by flukes. Hi.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education on Monday, October 21st, 2024. First, I'd like everyone to stand, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Next, we'll review and approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for today? Matt, Lara, all in favor? Thank you. And then we'll approve the minutes from October 7th, 2024. Can I get a motion to approve? Penny, Brendan, all in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much. Moving on to comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker with a maximum of 15 minutes on each subject. And just a reminder, when you, if you approach the board, if you just please state your name and your street address, we'd appreciate it. Anybody like to approach the board this evening?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Elena Colarusso. I live at 176 Summer Street. Excuse me. I want the board to know what is being given as required reading in 9th grade English. I apologize in advance for the offensive language. This is why I'm a little choked up, because what I'm about to say makes me very uncomfortable. This is taken from the book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. Did you know that Indians are living proof that niggers fuck buffalo? This is what our kids are reading. I love that tree, I said. That's because you're a tree fag. I'm not a tree fag. Then how do you come you like to stick your dick in knotholes? I stick my dick in the girl trees. I spent hours in the bathroom with a magazine that has 1,000 pictures of naked movie stars. Naked women plus right hand equals happy, happy, joy, joy. Yep, that's right. I admit that I masturbate. I'm proud of it. I'm good at it. I'm ambidextrous. If there were a professional masturbators league, I'd get drafted #1 and make millions of dollars. Maybe you're thinking, well, you really shouldn't be talking about masturbation in public. Well, tough, I'm going to talk about it because everybody does it and everybody likes it. If God hadn't wanted us to masturbate, he wouldn't have given us thumbs. You should read and draw because really good books and cartoons give you a boner. You should get a boner. You have to get a boner. Come on, I am rock hard, I said. I don't mean boner in the sexual sense. I don't think you should run through life with a real erect penis. So I sort of reacted to her hug. Miss Warren was hugging me so tight that I was pretty sure she could feel my physical reaction. Grief, when you feel so helpless and stupid and you can't even jerk off because it seems like too much trouble. Kid, you better keep your hands out of my daughter's panties. You just keep your trouser snake in your trousers. If you get my daughter pregnant, if you make some charcoal babies, I'm going to disown her.
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to approach the board? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to reports and recognition with Dr. Carenti.
And the board should have in front of you a hard copy of the assessment presentation. As you know, our last meeting we had, it's nice. It's our brand new projector. It's very bright.
Is it really new?
It's brand new. Yeah, it is. It is. Yep. And Principal Egan was here last meeting with the department chairs and others, and I want to say thank you to our CLC members and principals that are joining us here tonight. So Bill talks about grades 9 through 12, and Dr. Carenti does everything else. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And as Brian said, 2 weeks ago, you had an opportunity to meet the high school leaders who are part of the district leadership team. And tonight it gives me great pleasure to introduce the rest of the team. We have Kathy Grimes, who is our K through 4 reading coordinator. We have Karen Scalzo, who's our K through 5 writing coordinator. We have Sarah Bross, who is our ELA 5 through 8 coordinator. Jen DePonte, our math coordinator for K-8. Melinda Meyer, our innovation director and our science K-8. Mary Hannah, our social studies coordinator, K-8. These people are the content experts who stay current on best practices and design wonderful learning opportunities for our students. They lead curriculum writing, assessment design, professional learning, data teams, and assist with coaching staff instructionally. We also have several administrators present tonight. Matt Kasich, the principal of South, Zoe Robinson, the principal of East, Jan Murphy, the principal of West, and David Gussich, Sachs Middle School principal. So thank you so much for being here this evening. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm already behind. The ultimate purpose of assessment is to support enhanced student learning. It is multifaceted and should be used to drive instruction. Assessments should be non-standardized and standardized, and tonight I will be giving you an overview of the standardized assessments, specifically the results of the Next Generation Science Assessment and the Smarter Balanced, which is given in grades 3 through 8. By federal and state law, we are required to universally assess students yearly in English language arts and math in grades 3 through 8. And once in high school. We must also assess students in science in grades 5, 8, and once in high school. So state testing is part of an accountability system, and it provides an annual snapshot of our student achievement. State testing should not be the sole measure of student achievement. If curriculum is aligned to our Common Core standards, and students are receiving high quality instruction, for the most part, they should do well. There are 3 state tests given in the spring to meet our federal and state law. In grades 3 through 8, our students take the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is a test in English language arts and mathematics. In science, they take the Next Generation Science Assessment, and that is administered to our students in grades 5, 8, and 11. And then, as you recall, Mr. Egan spoke at length last time about the Connecticut SAT, and that's given to students in grade 11. We also have alternative assessments for students who are significantly disabled. And that is decided at a PPT for our students who are receiving special education services. So in English language arts and mathematics, we give a Connecticut alternative assessment. And for students in science, we give the Connecticut alternative science assessment. This is a very limited group of students, and they have to meet a certain criteria at a PPT in order to qualify to take it. Otherwise, most of our students are taking the tests that are given to all students, the Smarter Balanced and Next Generation. This is our assessment calendar for 24-25. The state gives us a large window in which to complete the assessments. We usually assess after April break, and it's about 5 sessions, 2 for ELA and 2 for math, and then 1 session for science if it's a grade in which they're tested in. The 3rd through 5th graders usually sit for about an hour, and then we usually end the session and they go on with their day. And usually our grades 6 through 8, they sit probably a little bit longer, maybe 90 minutes. Students actually are given an untimed amount to take the Smarter Balanced. It's not a timed test. So a student could finish the test in those 2 sessions. That's the majority of our students are finishing it within those 2 sessions, but sometimes they might need a little extra time to finish it. So I'm going to begin with the Next Generation Science Assessment. The Next Generation Science Assessment is a computer adaptive test, and it consists of a variety of stimulations. The questions that our students engage in are meant to hit the 3 dimensions of science. And so we use the concepts of science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts to meet the 3 disciplinary items of life science, physical science, earth and space science. So the next generation, the engineering practices is really about those kinds of questions that they receive. It's really about analyzing the data and thinking about the data that's in front of them. The cross-cutting concepts, it's like the study of patterns. It's examining that cause and effect. And then they meet those 3 disciplines of life science, physical science, and earth and space. So when we get our results, we always take a look at how our students are performing overall, and we take a look at a snapshot over time. So there is a gap between grade 5 when they're given and grade 8 when they're given, so you're really not comparing those cohorts because there's such a gap over time. What you are looking at is at the end of 5th grade is what have they mastered in the area of science. So have they mastered those standards in the next generation science standards? So we're really pleased to see that 89.9% of our 5th graders have met or exceeded that goal, and that 84.3% of our 8th graders have met or exceeded that goal. The next generation science test, similar to the Smarter Balance, is reported in 4 different levels. And so you see the top bars are 5th graders, and the second bar is our 8th graders. Level 4 is considered exceeding, so that's the blue area. Those students are exceeding the goal. Level 3 is where students have met the goal. Level 2 is yellow, that's the approaching the goal. And then the red is that they have not met that goal yet. We also take a look at gender. And last year, our males outperformed our females slightly. And that's not a trend that we see. The year before, actually, our females outperformed the males. So it's really more cohort specific, we think. We're not seeing a pattern at all. And then similar to 8th grade, where our females 86.6% and 81.9% of the males. So we always do take a look at that, but it's not a trend that we're seeing with our males or our females over time. We also like to compare our results to like communities. So this is our DIRG, our district reference group. And we're very pleased to see the results for our 5th grade. They were first in the DIRG and they were first in the state. And then our 8th graders did just as well. They were second in the DIRG and they were third in the state. So there was a small district, regional school district 18, which outperformed both Wilton and New Canaan. So we spend a lot of time looking at this data, analyzing it, going back to the disciplines, trying to see how our students performed in each of those disciplines. Melinda Meyer does an extensive analysis of this data. She shares this data with all of the principals, the assistant principals, as well as the other coordinators, because oftentimes you'll see patterns between science and math. Maybe data representation in science is an area that's weak. You might also see that as an area that's weak in mathematics. And then she works closely with those science teachers to assure that our curriculum's aligned to our standards and that we're meeting the needs of those students. We really spend a lot of time diving into how students performed at the different levels and making sure that they're continually growing over time. I'd now like to dive into the Smarter Balanced Assessment. This is also a computer adaptive test, and it contains a variety of item types, such as multiple choice and open-ended responses. In addition to the computer adaptive test, the students take a performance task in math. The performance task is designed to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and higher order thinking skills to explore and analyze a complex real-world scenario. In English language arts, We have 4 areas of knowledge and skills that are measured. In reading, students show they can read and understand a variety of complex, grade-appropriate, informational, and literary texts. In writing, students must use evidence to support their ideas in written responses, and they must produce effective writing for a range of purposes. In listening, students interpret and use information delivered orally to determine main ideas, summarize, or analyze. And then students are required to research a topic and use the findings to take a position. There are also 4 areas of knowledge and skill in mathematics as well. In concepts and procedures, students will explain and use mathematics to solve problems. They must complete problems accurately. In problem solving, students need to understand how math concepts link together. In modeling and data analysis, students must apply their mathematical knowledge to solve real-world problems. And then students must communicate their mathematical reasoning. So similar to how I explained the next generation science standards, we also have 4 levels in the Smarter Balanced. Level 1 is when they're not meeting that achieved standard. Level 2, they're approaching the achieved standard. Level 3, they're meeting the standard. And level 4, they're exceeding that standard. Students also receive an overall vertical score in ELA and math, and it's that vertical scaled score that allows us to track growth from year to year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So students receive feedback on how they're performing in each area of ELA and math. And the feedback is limiting when looking at an individual. So there are certain targets that they'll have in the area of reading, they'll have certain targets in the area of mathematics, but the parents don't receive the results of how they perform on each of those targets. Instead, it's more of general of how they did overall in reading, how they did overall in listening, how they did overall in writing and research. But we do get a better picture of how our students perform in those targets. We're able to look at it by school, we're able to look at it by district, and we are able to look at it by grade level and even teacher. It doesn't allow us to drill into those individuals, but we get enough data that we can then make general statements about how we're performing on each of the targets. And I'll talk a little bit more about those targets and how we track those targets over time as well. So when we're analyzing our ELA data, and certainly I cannot take credit for all this analysis that goes on in the district here, that's really Kathy Grimes and Karen Scalzo and Sarah Bross. They spend a lot of time diving into those numbers and pulling charts and looking at class performance and looking at grade level performance and individual student performance. So I'm here tonight really to help give that summary of all of their analysis. So I do want to give them credit where credit is due. But when we're analyzing our data, we always start with the big picture. And so 86.6 of our 3rd through 8th graders met or exceeded the achievement level. And that's of a 3 or 4. Next, we dive into grade levels. And these are not matched cohorts, but they are close, and it gives us a real good snapshot of how our students did from year to year. So we're really proud of our 4th grade data. As you may recall, our 3rd graders took a dip in 2023, with only 78.8% of them meeting or exceeding that goal in ELA. And this was a pattern across the state, but obviously we were really concerned about that. And so we spent a lot of time really working hard with our 4th graders, really working with our teachers on making sure they were differentiating their instruction. And certainly the hard work paid off because our students in 4th grade had a result of 88.2% that met or exceeded that goal. So that's a significant growth for our 3rd to 4th graders last year. We're also really proud of those 6th graders. 6th graders always tend to take a dip in the Smarter Balance, and that's because it's a shift in standards. So we now shift to the 612 Common Core standards. So it's not unusual to see that dip take place across the state in sixth grade overall. But we're really proud of our sixth graders as well. Last year in 2023, 78.3% of them have met or exceeded that target. And then as seventh graders in 2024, 86.8%. So we're proud of the hard work that took place to really look at those individuals and really try to meet the needs of the students in those grade levels. We're obviously proud of all the other grade levels as well, but it was just 2 grade levels that I know we had talked at length about last year when I was presenting. We also look at our results by level. And so once again, our blue is really exceeding, our green is approaching, our yellow is, our green is met, our yellow is approaching, and our red is not met. And so we do have a lot of students exceeding the goal, which is also an increase from last year. And actually, although it looks like our 8th and 7th graders are a bit lower in their exceeding, that's actually huge growth from a year ago. So they actually have made nice growth in that exceeding, which means we're really trying to hit that high-end kid. And you will see that as I talk a little bit later in analyzing those vertical scores. And once again, we dive into this data by school, by class, by individuals. We triangulate the data, and we have conversations about student growth or lack of growth. We also take a look at our gender comparisons, and it's interesting because we continue to closely monitor our 6th grade boys. So once again, this is the 2nd year that our 6th grade boys didn't perform as well as our females in 6th grade, but they tend to bounce back in 7th grade. So we're not really sure. We're going to spend some time this year analyzing it a little bit further when we do our district assessments. So what does it mean from our district assessments? What does it mean when they're taking their mid-years, their NWA? Are we seeing this difference throughout the course of the year? So it's just something that we're closely monitoring as 7th graders. But we do see the bounce back. And interestingly enough, we do have more male teachers in 7th grade. So I don't know, do they help to pick more high-interest books for students? Do they, or are just they more developmentally prepared? It is a pattern across the state. We do see a dip for 6th grade boys. We also compare our data to like communities, and New Canaan continues to be at the top of the DIRG and the state overall, with 86.6% of our students who have met or exceeded that goal. We also compare our data by grade level. And once again, as you may recall, I talked a little bit about those 3rd grade. You can see that really highlighted here about that growth. I talked a little bit about the 6th grade as well. So we're really pleased with the data that we're seeing in the area of reading in grades 3 through 8. And I do have to give a lot of credit to the people that are sitting behind me for all the hard work that they do on a day-to-day basis with our teachers and certainly with our specialists and certainly even with students. We also take a look at our math data, and we do the same that we did for ELA. We start and we follow a similar process where we have 83.9% of our 3rd through 8th graders who've met or exceeded the achievement level. We take a look at our students by grade level. And once again, really pleased with those 3rd grade results. We saw some nice growth. We're pleased with our 6th to 7th grade and our 7th to 8th grade results as well. So we're starting to see some good trends happening in our math. We also sort the data by level. And we're really pleased to see that high percentage of students exceeding the achievement level. And it's really kudos to everyone, all the teachers and everyone. More than 50% of our students at each of the levels are exceeding the goal. We also do our gender comparison and similar data in 6th grade. We see that dip with those sixth grade boys. So once again, we're going to really spend some time taking a close look at our sixth grade data across the year to see if there's any patterns that we can pick up. Is it difference on district assessments, unit assessments? Are we seeing a difference on midterm assessments, NWEA, all the assessments that we do with our 3rd through 8th graders, but mainly our 6th graders. So we do compare our data to like communities, and we continue to be at the top of the DIRG and the top of the state with the overall achievement of 83.9% who've met or exceeded. We also compare our data by grade level, and a bit later, we're going to talk a little bit more deeply about some of the professional learning that we're planning to do for our middle school. We've done some professional learning with our 3rd grade and 4th grade, and the results have really paid off, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the professional learning that we have in store for our grades 5 through 8 as well. So after we examine the data by level, when we look at it and we say level 3, level 4, did they meet, did they exceed, we really have to dive in deeply, and we dive in deeply to the vertical scaled scores. Each level is divided in half, so every student gets a vertical scaled score. And when you look at the vertical scaled score, they divide them, so now you've got 8 different categories. So you might be meeting the goal at a level 3, but you might be a low level 3, or you might be a high level 3. Or you might be a low level 4 or a high level 4. And so we take a deep look at those vertical scaled scores, and at the top is the range of where we want our students to perform at that vertical scaled score, and then underneath it is what we call a growth target. So every student is required to hopefully make growth. That's our goal. Even if they're at a level 1, we want them to make growth. We want them to meet a growth target. That's our goal in working with individual students and differentiating the instruction for our students. This is also the growth target, similar to math. We also have one for ELA, still divided into those 8 different categories, once again being at the low or at the high level in each of those categories. So this data is really important to us, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through a couple examples to explain why it's so important. So as part of the Next Generation Accountability Report, the state is looking for all students to grow regardless of the level. So here's an example of how the growth is measured. So when we take a look at student A, they had a scaled score of 2,552 as a 7th grader, which put them at a level 3, or on the growth chart as a low level 3, so they're in a category 5. And then as an 8th grader, they had a scaled score of 2,580. They grew 28 points, but they were supposed to grow 40 points. So they don't get a flag for their growth, and the target that they achieved was 70%. We take a look at student B. Student B, as a 7th grader, scored a 2,601, put them at a level 3, high level 3, level 6. And then as an 8th grader, scored 2,686. So they grew 85 points. They get their growth flag, and then they get 110% of their target achieved. It doesn't go beyond 110%. That's the highest that you could get. So if you got the 40, it would have been 100%. Above that is giving you that 110%. You look at student C, who's at that high level. So they are a level 8. They are at 2,694. We're still looking for growth for that student. They went up to 2,704. So they grew 10 points, and they maintained the high level 8. So that's why they get a growth flag. and they grew 83%. And then you take a look at student D, and student D had a scaled score of 2,617, which put them at a high level 3. When they took it as an 8th grader, they got 2,610, which kept them at the level 3, but they dropped to a low level 3. So they didn't grow. So they didn't get a growth flag, and they didn't meet their growth achievement. So it's important for us to look at this data, because you could imagine they're still going to fall in that range of a child who met or exceeded the goal. But we also need to understand, why did they drop in their score? And how can we make sure that we're meeting their needs so that they're instructionally improving throughout the course of the year, and that they're going to continue to make that growth. So the growth starts in 4th grade, and then it keeps getting measured year after year all the way up until they're in 8th grade. And so for us, we can actually look at growth flags. So you can create a chart of a class, you can create a chart of a grade level, and you can quickly scroll down to see how many kids hit their growth flags and how many kids didn't hit their growth flags. It allows you then to dive more deeply into possibly why they didn't hit their growth, or did they not make enough growth. Another way that we look at it is also through a scattered plot. I know, Zoe, you're very proud of me. So my scatter plots. And I do want to compliment the math people that are here as well, Jen DePonte, for all of her hard work in the area of math. But when we look at the scatter plot, this is actually an example of a 4th grade class. So what's really interesting about the scatter plots is if it's electronic, you can actually scroll over the blue dot, and it actually tells you the child's name. And so you can do a quick glance. So this is a really interesting scatter plot, because you're going to see that all but 2 students were at or above that goal. So you see a couple students in the middle there that are right on the bubble, and you see the vertical scaled scores going down, and that they had to meet a 2,485 in 4th grade. And then you see the 100% of their target. So the kids that are sitting right on that green line are probably those students that were probably level 3, and they probably were high level 3, and they maybe have dropped to the level 5, or they've maintained at that level 5 and didn't go up. So those are kids that are kind of sitting in that bubble there. Once again, met the goal, but didn't make as much growth as we had wanted. You then take a look over at the top of the chart, and you see a lot of these kids in that class made 110% growth. Like, that's huge, which talks a lot about that 4th grade and the growth that occurred within those 4th grade classes. So this teacher really pushed hard with those students, and to have that many kids performing with 110% growth is huge. Another bubble on here that I wish I had like a little pointer is most notable. Not only are the kids that are sitting that exceeded that standard and are sitting above that, it's also the child that's right above that, also 110%, but didn't meet the goal. Like, that's huge growth. We have a student who probably was around a level 1 or 2, probably at the low levels, made 110% towards meeting that standard. They did not meet the goal, but we celebrate that they made 110% growth. That's huge for that child to make that much growth. Our hope is that we continue to work closely with that child. We continue to track the progress of that child to hopefully get them to make even that same amount of growth this upcoming year, and most likely will have met or exceeded the goal. And then we look at the other student who's on the other side of the bubble that's at about 50%. So once again, just didn't make the growth that they needed. Still met the goal, but didn't make that growth. And so each of these kids have individual stories. The teachers know those stories, the math specialists know those stories, the reading specialists know those stories, the administrators at the elementary level are tuned in, they're in those data team meetings, the administrators at the middle school level, they're there. So they're all working on behalf of these students to help them to grow. I just thought this was just a kind of a unique way to kind of also show the data and how we analyze the data. We also dive into the targets. So as I said before, in math, this is an example of math. I chose math because of some of the questions that were raised at the last Board of Ed meeting, so I wanted to just kind of show a little bit about the progression that takes place. So in math, there's 4 areas of knowledge and skill that you may recall. We talked about the concepts and procedures, we talked about problem solving, modeling and data analysis, and communicating reason. So these are the targets in each area. There's targets, and these are the targets for the concepts and procedures for just 3rd graders. There's also targets for problem solving and targets for modeling and data analysis. And so we're able to actually pull data and take a look at relative strengths and relative weaknesses. We're able to look at it by district, by school, by teacher. And this is also not only a way for us to measure how we're doing overall with our students, but it's also a way for us to kind of take a look at some of our professional learning. So we really had targeted, I think I spoke highly about this at the last Board of Ed meeting, about fractions. It's something that's really important to the development of students mathematically. We did a lot of professional learning with our 3rd grade teachers, and now it's turned into a relative strength. But it's not over. We have to continue to work. When we talked last time at the Board of Ed meeting, it's important to remember that our teachers who are certified in K-6, they really don't get very much coursework in the teaching of math. They might have 1 or 2 classes in the teaching of math. A lot of their coursework sits in the area of reading. So it's really our responsibility to help those teachers to understand how to teach math to our students and to give them that professional learning, which is why we really pushed hard for that math coach in the elementary schools to really help support the teachers to learn how to instruct students in the area of math. And it's just very fascinating. I think, and we're proud of that. We're proud that our students have made that growth in that target area. It's interesting because I also chose to show you the progression from 3rd to 4th grade. And I wanted you to see the progression of those targets. So we're still only in the concepts and procedures. And when you look at the concepts and procedures, now you're going to see 3 targets with fractions. So they still have that target F, where they're looking at extend, understand a fraction, but now we're adding in equivalence and ordering of fractions, which is really a difficult concept for many 4th graders, how to order those fractions. But then you're also going to see target G, which also dives into fractions, but now we're also putting it in with whole numbers. And then you're also going to see it in target H, once again, adding it in with decimals. So you can see the progression of just a simple target from 3rd, moving into a more complex target in 4th, and then you'll just see that continuing on all the way through the middle school. So it's important for our teachers to understand how do we instruct to these targets. These are all integrated within our curriculum. The Smarter Balanced Assessment is based on Common Core standards. So we teach to those Common Core standards within our curriculum. So we'd like to hope that we're meeting those Common Core standards, our students are meeting them, and they're growing. We also do ongoing assessment with our students. So we have district assessments in grades 3 through 8. We have formative assessments, unit assessments, benchmark assessments. We have midterms as they move into the middle school years in grades 6 through 8. And we always call data teams to look through that data, to sort through that data. We do item analysis to see how our students are performing on those assessments. We also give the NWEA in grades 3 through 8. It does give you a little chart here. The NWEA is reported in a RIT, which is the RASH unit scales, and it actually gives you a comparison and a predictor to how they might perform on the Smarter Balanced. So they take the RIT and they say, this is possibly the scaled score that they could get on the Smarter Balanced. What's interesting about the NWEA is it also allows us to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of certain standards. So you can run a report on the student and kind of look at where might be strengths that they have in the area of math or reading and where might be weaknesses, which then allow a teacher, when they're working with the students, to kind of make those small group instruction and dive more deeply into it, especially if it's a unit of focus. So next steps. I spoke a lot about how we review the data by grade level, class, and individual. We review the data by targets in ELA, math, and science. We continue to progress monitor students through benchmark and district assessments. We conduct data teams to review results on varied assessments. We create individual plans through response to intervention, and then we provide ongoing professional learning. So I am going to ask Jen DePonte, who's just so excited, I know Jen, to just kind of come up and talk a little bit about some of the professional learning that we're doing in the area of math, particularly in the middle school. So where we've taken off in the elementary, moving on.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Correnti put up a couple charts which were very helpful with the progression of fractions. And it was nice to see in the early grades, 3 and 4, it's very basic. It's a fraction is a number. I can order fractions, I can compare fractions, and then things get a little more complicated. As 5th graders, they start more computation with fractions, still understanding models. In 6th grade, it gets a little more abstract, and they're reasoning more abstractly with computation. And then things all start to come together. They're applying things. We bring in positives and negatives. It just builds on each other. And what we're finding is, and Dr. Correnti raised this point earlier, is that a student might be sitting in a 7th grade class and really be struggling with ratios and proportions. And to really get into what the misconception is, it might go back to something that was taught in 4th grade. So a lot of our professional learning is about helping teachers at every grade level understand what was the instruction that happened before, what is really core and essential, and how to build on that. So it's not so much practicing problems until you get it right, but it's about the math specialists working with teachers to see, here's a strategy of how to instruct it. Here's a different set of problems that might help unpack that misconception. And so that happens all the time. The specialists at the middle school are outstanding, and at the intermediate school are outstanding, and they're always planning with teachers. We talk about it at Wednesday department meetings. It's guided some of our professional learning that we even started last year. On some of those days, it's nice because we can get 5 through 8 together in one room. And last year, for example, we gave maybe 8 tasks, fraction tasks, asking teachers, can you pick which grade this would actually come out of? And it was a great conversation, and having a 5th grade teacher explain to an 8th grade teacher how they instruct was eye-opening for a lot of 8th grade teachers. And the reverse, how do you stretch a 5th grade student? Where does it go? So the conversation went both ways. So I think that's been helpful. We're seeing when we look at RTI plans and just basic tier 1 plans for students at the middle school, the common theme is fractions when it gets older. So I think we've taken a step this year. The specialists have done an incredible amount of work, and talking with teachers too about what do we want every student to understand and how can we track that along the way. Dr. Correnti talked about all the other assessments that we look at. So the interim assessment, unit assessments, all of those things will help us monitor what we're doing when the specialists do all of this coaching work with the teachers. So they're doing some great things. Teachers are open to it, which is exciting. So it's a lot of new learning. Thank you.
I'll open it up to questions, and I do have some experts here that can help to answer them as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Correnti. And thank all of you. I want to commend you on the amazing work that you guys continue to do. And just being the best, it's not easy to stay the best. So it means that you're continuing to work forward, work hard, plow forward. And it's impressive to see the areas that you focused on, particularly in those grade levels where we were afraid that they were falling behind, and to see that massive improvement is impressive. So thank you. Question I have is just around, if you just look back, and some of the scores back in like 2018, 2019 were still a little bit higher than they are today. Do you attribute that still to some of the COVID learning loss over that time frame?
I do. I think we're tracking back upward, but I think, is it the current 5th grade? that it was impacted by COVID as kindergartners.
Yeah.
That just kind of gives you a perspective of where they were. Certainly, that was, I think, why the state took that dip in third grade, because we really recognized that there were probably some fundamental skills that they missed in those early grades. And I think we've made huge gains. We're really pleased of the growth, and we've put them in a good place as they've head off to the intermediate school, and we're really proud of that. And I think we're going to continue to see the growth. I think the learning that we're doing and the diving into the targets and the professional learning is also going to help help our students to keep moving forward as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Other questions? Matt?
I've got a bunch. I should have peppered them throughout the presentation, but I figured I'd spare you, Jill, but it's going to be a long night. Here we go.
Oh, gosh.
So, starting out with the next gen assessment, and as we look at the different cohorts from grade 5 to grade 8 and the different vintages, comparing sort of, let's say, 2019 to 2023, so that cohort of 5th graders with the cohort of 8th grader, by the time they get to 8th grade, and then again, the next year, 21 with 24, again, comparing 5th grade classes to 8th grade classes, again, we see a drop, right? What explains the drop? And I think I have an idea, but because we think we see it in other numbers as well, but have we sort of figured out why that is? I mean, consistently we're seeing a drop. I mean, it points to clear problem somewhere in the middle school. I mean, between 5th and 8th grade, and I highlighted a bunch of data that highlights this, like the kids are clearly underperforming during those grades.
So
Or the performance is coming off, I shouldn't say, during that time frame consistently.
So it is a different test, and you're testing different standards. So that could be a part of the reason that you're performing. We also sometimes have students that have been removed from science up until 5th grade, and then they start coming back into science, and they may have been removed for a variety of reasons. And now all of a sudden they're back, so we're trying to figure out how to close some of those gaps for those students. It does become more complex as well. And so it is trying to make sure that we're meeting those next generation science standards. I'm not sure, Melinda, if there's a specific target that you would want to talk about that might give us a reason as to why. And if you want to come use the mic, that would be great.
Sure, I'll reiterate a little bit about what Dr. Crenti just mentioned. It is a different test. It's a different scale score that's issued on the test as well. And so one of the things that we look at when we see that is we do look at the state and the DERG data as well. So when you take a look at the schools that are higher performing or at the top of the DERG or the state, from year to year, they're actually a lot different. So when you look at the state, when you look at the top 10 of the state, I don't think we have that here right now, we're consistently there, but a lot of the other districts are changing. So the ones, they're not like reshuffling in the sequence, they're just different districts. And so for us, that means that we're still looking at our curriculum and the alignment and seeing that the standards are being hit. But one of the ways that we can improve our at or exceeding levels, our levels 3 and 4, is by looking at the levels of engagement. So once we have a solid curriculum, which we have in place now we're fine tuning it. So we're taking a look at what are the phenomenon that our students are engaging in. So a great example is when we got our score through the first time through, our matter and its interaction score indicated on the test wasn't as strong as the other disciplinary core ideas. And so we were like, let's take a look at that phenomenon. And we changed it. And so then we went to the bath bomb phenomenon. So if you have children and they talk about the bath bomb, and then the scores were strengthened through there. So that's one area that we look at is the level of engagement through our phenomenon. The other place that we look at fine-tuning is around the scientific and engineering practices. So we have only had 3 years of data that has been reported out against the scientific and engineering practices. So up until this year, we really couldn't look for any trends or any patterns. But now we have 3 years of data. One of the things that we saw that we weren't performing as high as the other SCPs was around analyzing, interpreting data. So when we saw that now, 2 years in, we decided to look at a platform that specializes in providing opportunities for teachers to have real-life, authentic data sets to bring into the units and see if we can start to have our students interact with those a little bit more. So when we're performing at the level we're performing at, those are some of the ways that we're looking at and engaging with the curriculum.
Okay, I guess my question is, it's meet or exceeds achievement, right? I mean, I'd say for most parents in New Canaan, it's a pretty low bar. And so, it's sort of like, that's what we expect, right? To meet or exceed whatever the sort of state standard is. And so as I look at it, and I understand it's a different test, but we're talking about how many of these students sort of meet or achieve whatever the test may be given by the state, which I would assume most parents in New Canaan is the bare minimum, right? From what their expectations are, at least. And so, again, I'm sort of comparing not with the DERG, not with the state, but with the same cohort 3 years prior, right? And sort of whatever achievement they had attained, right? From 88% to 83%, from 88% to 84%, right? Like, that same cohort, their performance, whatever the standard may be, it's the standard established by the state, meets or exceeds, is diminished, right? And so is reduced. And so that's the concern I have, right? Like, notwithstanding whatever anyone else in the DERG is doing, but those students, they met whatever standardized test, they achieved at some rate 3 years later on average, and again, it's consistently lower among those same students. So, and then as we look forward, if you roll forward, right, and sort of say, okay, well, let's look and say, stay on the next gen, for example, from a gender perspective, right? For the genders, and this seems to be the driver, and it seems like, this may explain the data that I was referring to before, is that the delta from 5th to 8th grade for boys is 10 percentage points. That's huge, right? And so, whereas for girls, it's only 2. It's actually less than 2. It's 1.8. And so, that seems to be the driver. If I were to look at this from a data perspective, it seems to me that's the driver that's influencing the data that I referenced before, is again, our boys are falling behind or aren't achieving what they were doing before, right?
I would actually have to go back to the 2021 data to take a look at how our 5th graders did gender-wise.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that,
We're
because
not
that's,
comparing. Perfect.
yeah, I want to just give you that data, Mark, because I don't have that in front of me, but I would want to go back to say, was there a gender gap
Same
there
cohort.
or not?
And the gender gap, I mean, it shows up in all of the data, and it reverses out a little bit in math, but again, it shows up in math in 6th grade as well. And so I guess the elephant in the room here is what's going on, right? Like, I remember seeing this last year. I remember seeing it the year before. Parents have seen it. I've spoken out about it. What have we done to identify why our 6th grade boys, or boys in this age bracket, are falling behind? What have we done to identify it? What are we doing to address it?
Right. And so I think that's what I was talking about. It's really now diving more deeply into the data assessments that were given every single, and we sit at a data team. So it's now taking apart that. So have we had our data team meetings? We have. We also need to look at the percentage of boys versus girls who might be identified as a high-need student, because that also could play an impact. We also need to take a look at, so when we do a unit assessment, how did our boys perform in this class? How did our girls perform in this class? Do we see a difference? Is there particular item analysis that we need to dive more deeply in? So that's the work that we're doing this year. We do see them make those gains back up in 7th grade, but that's not good enough for us. So we saw this as a 2-year trend, and now it's really saying, what can we do to look at the data? When we looked at NWEA really quickly for grade 6, we just completed it. We're in the process. I think there's a few students finishing it off. We're not seeing a gender difference. So, but it's a different kind of test. NWEA is multiple choice. This is asking kids to do some open-ended responses, whether it be in ELA or whether it be in mathematics or whether it be in science. So it's taking a look at some of those open-ended responses and some of those different data that we do throughout the year to determine, are our boys making the growth that they need to be making?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would push back there, Dr. Correnti, is that we're talking about large sample sizes, right? And so we're talking about large sample size, and we're talking about large deltas. And so this isn't driven by a couple of outliers, is my point, skewing the data. It seems like it's pretty broad-based and it's pretty consistent across the different tests, be it ELA or Next Gen or even math. And so, and you mentioned yourself that in the ELA section that this is something we see and has been observed throughout the state as well. Mm-hmm. And so, it points to me that this that there's something else going on here, right? It's not outliers. It's not, the configuration of the different classes. There's something in the instruction, the way these boys are being taught or stimulated or, I don't know, tested, that points to this, and it's been pretty consistent for years. And so I think I'd like a little more understanding as to digging into the data is obvious. I mean, it's there, right? And it's been there for years. I guess I'm looking for sort of more concrete steps to address it and to sort of, I don't know, even if it's just start changing things, what's the plan for next year, right? What concrete steps could?
Right, and I guess I'm not being clear in the sense of once we look at the data, it's then trying to figure out the instruction that goes along with the data. So the data is only so good and the analysis is only so good unless you dive back into the instruction. So it might be that we need to do more small group targeted instruction. Maybe we need to find books that are of higher interest for boys. Maybe we need to be diving more deeply into answering questions in writing and giving them more opportunities to dive into that. So I think once again, it's you look at the data and then you look at the instruction and you determine, do they need a strategy group? Do they need a small group instruction? Do we need to be working with them differently? Do we need to be, approaching them differently? Maybe they need to orally rehearse it before they go down and put it into writing. So what are the strategies that we need to teach them so that when they become on an assessment of this nature, it's more that muscle memory that they've got those strategies.
But given the fact that it's throughout the state, right? And I appreciate sort of your expertise in curriculum. I mean, have you thought about it being outside of the classroom? I mean, what about adding a second recess? What about adding PE? I mean, you grin, but like there's a lot of evidence behind that for boys. Mm-hmm. And so can we think broader than maybe we'll teach them a little differently? I mean, is there something inherently different about a prepubescent boy or a pubescent boy that learns differently that we need to accommodate their learning style better? Because we're obviously not, it's just not happening.
Yep. Yeah,
So if we looked at things like that, I mean, outside of the
We've looked at
classroom,
kinesthetics. I've had conversations with Mr. Gussage about movement breaks. We do encourage movement breaks. So I'm smiling because we've had these conversations, Mr. Gussage and myself, about this.
Gussage boot camp.
But you're right. I mean, there are boys that, and girls that might do better if they're just standing and not sitting. So if they're doing their work, is it okay to stand? Of course it's okay to stand. But it's once again creating those environments, moving around in the classroom, not always sitting in your seat, moving from a rug to a chair to a standing desk, to giving them different options as well. But so we look at everything when it comes to that physical movement.
Well, and I know it's specific to science, but am I right in understanding the transition to the next generation science standards really has gone from kind of a sit and get kind of model to a more engaged, active, participatory model with kids? Is that right, Melinda? I mean, and we're in the midst of transition still. It's not, we haven't been doing it all that long, but that shift in standards is a shift in pedagogy as well. Am I right?
Absolutely. I think, I talked a little bit about the phenomenon piece, but it's the application to those real world scenarios that the kids are bringing in. If you think about some of the things that are happening up in the sky right now, the students who are actively taking photographs of the moon, actively taking photographs of the comet, it's ways that we're able to connect with them. Within the classrooms, we have stools now that they just tuck under their chairs because they're actively modeling together, moving to someone else's model, looking at it, critiquing it, bringing back ideas to their own. So it's a collective, collaborative construction of explanations for them. And the 8th grade test is a cumulative test, so it's students and they're learning from grades 6, 7, and 8. And oftentimes, sometimes within that block, we have students who are moving in from other districts who sometimes might have taught standards in different orders. And so one of the things that we picked up on our data, Mr. Campbell, when you're talking about maybe why there might be that shift, one of the things that we noticed this year was that there was amount of students who we didn't have tests in grade 5, now have tests in grade 8. And when we think about how they enter into our program, what might be some of the questions we need to engage with in our kids to see what background are you coming to us with science, and what may we need to shore up as a foundation in order to have you excel faster within the grade level standards that you're entering into. So that was kind of an interesting thing that came from our data team this year.
One last question, I'm sorry. As far as math, and you brought up the math coach and sort of what we're seeing there, do we have, I mean, instead of teachers having to, I guess, how could I phrase this? Do we have a minimum required number of hours of professional education hours for math, and sort of how is that? I'm just concerned that, will the teacher have to identify the deficiencies in the student, or do we proactively help them correct those deficiencies once we know that they're there?
Jen's nodding. I'm going to ask Jen, you want to come on up?
In terms of proactively identifying the teachers, I think back to grade K is where it all starts. The specialists there have been doing a lot with testing out some kindergarten screeners, doing the same thing in first grade to identify what are the foundational skills that are needed to be successful. If they don't have it, helping the teachers with the instruction to fill those holes, and then we keep monitoring from there. So that's kind of a big thing that we've worked on a lot, is to go backwards, so not wait until we see the gaps develop in the middle school, but to really tighten up as much as we can, K1, 2, so that we have that. The specialists are always, after every assessment, so 3 times a year, they get the data, they're sorting it, they're looking at it. A lot of interviews with the students as well, so I think we're finding that paper and pencil tasks, which are common in first grade on, don't always give you the full information. So if specialists have questions, want to dig further, they're going to do that. So it's definitely not waiting for the teacher to present it. If anything, it's the specialist who's seeing something, who's looking at the trends, who knows the children's history from previous years, and they're bringing it forward.
And how do you determine which teachers work with the specialist, and sort of how does the specialist identify that? Does the teacher self-select and ask for instruction, or is there a minimum amount of instruction that's required for a teacher? I mean, how do we get the most out of these math coaches? Is what I'm trying to
I think it
understand.
varies. We just had a very involved conversation about even with new teachers. New teachers are getting help from all curriculum specialists and the math coach and Jen Eldridge. And so we're trying to balance that. So in terms of math, we look to see where the needs are. So if a teacher is new to the district, new to the grade, they might get a certain level of support. We try to group teachers as well. So for instance, if we have 3 new teachers at a grade level at one school, the specialist or the math coach is going to do some unit unpacking with them. It varies. Sometimes even we have conversations with administrators, myself or the specialist, saying this is an initiative or this is an area of need for the grade. We want the specialist to design some PL or attend some team meetings, and we'll kind of drive that. But sometimes teachers are saying, I want feedback in my classroom. There's some teachers who are so excited that Mary Fisher's on as a math coach to say, can you come in and give me feedback on something? So it's a combination of everything.
Okay.
And I think what's important to remember, 5 through 8 is content specific. So when we have professional learning in August, when we have professional learning in November, and February, those content specific are getting professional learning in their area. So whether they teach science, whether they teach math, whether they teach reading, social studies, they're receiving that professional learning. At the elementary level, we oftentimes have to divide a little bit. We have to say, we need to roll out some new units in the area of math. So our 3rd grade teachers might be going for half a day in the area of math and getting professional learning in that area. And then the afternoon, they might be getting professional learning in the area of reading. So at the elementary level, we really do have to spread it out based on some of the data that we're seeing and based on some of the units of study. We always begin every unit of study with an unpacking. So regardless of what grade you sit in, whether you're in kindergarten or 1st or 2nd or 4th, the first thing that you do is you're getting ready to roll out unit number 2, you're sitting with the specialist and you're unpacking that unit of study so that everybody has a deep understanding of what the ultimate outcome is for students, how we're going to go about teaching that outcome, It's a great opportunity for veteran teachers to share with new teachers as well. But then that planning continues on for many of the new teachers. The veteran teachers have taught that unit before, and they can continue to move on with their plan. And then we're also really pushing hard with the new teachers, using our math specialists, using our math coaches to help with that.
So it's mandated by the administration?
Yeah.
And not self-selected? Okay.
Yeah, so we really spend a lot of time having conversations. We had a close to 2-hour meeting on Friday, really just talking about how we're going to help to target some of our new staff and new people to grade level. So when they move from second grade to fourth grade, which a lot of teachers like that opportunity to move, they're teaching new curriculum. They have kids at different levels. So they have to have a deep understanding of what they're teaching. So it's really driven by the administration, the coordinators, the specialists. We're all giving input. But we also are considerate of understanding that if they have a good understanding of how to do small group instruction in the area of reading, then we might pull back a little bit in reading coaching and push hard with math coaching and say, so now how you did the small group instruction in reading is exactly how you should be doing the small group instruction in math. What data do you have that drives that small group instruction for the students within your classroom? The reading specialist is still touching base with that teacher to make sure that they're sticking with the unit of study and moving forward. But it's also now saying, you've learned this in one content area, how do you apply that to another content area? It's very complex at the elementary level when they're required to teach all the academic subject areas.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was wondering, yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Very good.
Penny?
So I just wanted to make, I mean, we spend a lot of time on these results, and just overall, we're doing fabulously. So just thank you to everyone in the system and all the students for how hard they work. I guess one thing I want to just check, do we still like these standards? Do we feel by teaching our kids to get to these standards that we are doing the best thing that we can for the students in our district? In science, in math, and in English? Because that's just one of my concerns. I mean, if we think there are problems with the standards, then that would be a different issue for this board to tackle.
No, I think the standards are of high quality. I think they get complex and they require students to really think critically. These Common Core standards are actually aligned to what's on an SAT. So, we don't want to move away from standards because it is, years ago when they made that shift with the SAT, they aligned the SAT to the Common Core standards as well. So I think the standards are of high quality. I'm seeing the nods. They are rigorous, and they do cover all the areas. In the area of reading, you're covering the speaking, the listening, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the comprehension. In math, you're covering all the other, those 5 areas that I talked about as well, with the problem solving and the computation and all of that. So that's what we would want our kids. We want our kids to be really strong readers. We want them to be really strong mathematicians. And then we want them to be able to apply all of those skills, especially when they're starting to get into middle school. How do you apply all that reading to research and to critical thinking? And how do you apply it across content areas? How do you apply it in science? Reading a science article is very different than reading, a book for pleasure or reading a realistic fiction book. It's very different. How do you read for social studies to gather information, to research? How do you write towards science? How do you write towards social studies? How do you make a clear argument? So all of those standards really incorporate all that. So I would say that the standards are of high quality.
I thought you were going to say that, but I always think it's important to check, because if
Yeah.
they aren't, then we might want to advocate for something else, with the state. I was also interested in in next generation science, and I think you touched on this a little bit. And I think in the other areas as well, the group of students in the red increases a little bit as you go up. And are we adding students who take that test? Is one part of the question on that. And then the other is, do you track, I know you went at the very end about how you track each student's goals, but I'd just sort of be interested to know if the number of students who are exceeding, tends to be the same, right? Or tends to grow. One of these graphs has the number of students exceeding, growing over time. And so is it do we have a certain group of students that kind of keeps going well, and then we have another group that is falling behind and maybe falling behind more? Or, are there any patterns like that that you're seeing?
So we track the data all the way back to elementary schools. So Melinda actually spends time taking the 5th grade data that comes in and then actually going back and seeing what was the elementary school that they were in and what was their science experience in elementary school before they even get to 5th grade. And so there are sometimes students that are pulled from science because we just don't have enough time in the day to give them all that they need in regards to services. We do have kids that come in new to the district. So we would have to dive more deeply in to see, is it a matched cohort? Once again, we'd have to dive back to the 2021 data to look at that matched cohort to say where were our 5th graders at or above, where were they, meeting level 3, level 4, because this is not the matched cohort data. So you
Right.
want to dive back to the matched cohort data. Making a note now, next year presentation, make sure I got some matched cohort data for next generation science assessment, promise. Made a note, it's right here in my file. So I will have cohort comparison for next generation science next year, because it is hard. I can't tell you right now that whether that number grew or actually went down, because I don't have the matched cohort data. And I don't have it in this file either. It's back in my file cabinet.
We're already.
Probably in the basement
We
at
already
central
can't
office.
wait till October of 2025.
I know, you're sitting, you're
That's
so
right. So-
excited.
Okay, so my last is, we're about to go into budget season. I know it's everybody's favorite season. And I guess if we want to take this to the next level, I would love to see us get into the 90s, routinely on all these subjects with all these kids. So I'm going to depend upon you all to tell the board, what we need if we decide as a board that that's our challenge and that's like what we'd like to do.
They are not shy, and neither are the principals.
Thank you again.
So again, like, these grades are stellar. To what degree, and you mentioned that the SAT was built off of these standards, or vice
Common
versa?
Core
Common Core.
standards.
So to what degree do the early grades, early assessments predict future assessments, as in whether it be on a cohort or an individual level? If you get a good score in 3rd grade, odds are no, not getting it. You can't predict it, or you're not
You
getting
can't
it.
predict
Okay.
it. There's so much developmentally that happens with students between 3rd and 11th grade.
Sure.
And we even see that with just students and how much they grow in their maturity. I will tell you, we could tell a group of 8th graders that, this test actually counts. And they all look at you like, what? Well, this is going to count for your high school placement for next year. You have a whole different group of kids sitting in front of you, where in 6th grade, they're kind of like, high school, that's so far away. So it's not a good predictor. I also think that kids' stamina changes, it builds, they grow, they can read for longer periods of time, their vocabulary grows. So I would say that it's not a good predictor of how our students probably perform on the SAT. But it is based on those standards. What we do know is that our students leave the middle school really equipped with taking assessments on the computer. Like they spend a lot of time. They know how to take those next generation assessments. And then I think that now that the SAT has switched over to being computer-based, I think we just have to continue to give them those opportunities between 9th and 11th grade so they don't lose those skills of how you take it on a computer. Oh yeah, there's that Desmo calculator that I can actually use. I remember that back in 8th grade. There's other little features that I can use on a computer. I can use the cross-off button. I can flag it, and I can go back to the question. There's a lot of little test-taking strategies that we do with our 3rd through 8th graders because they know how to take tests on computers. And then they kind of forget. And so now we have to kind of bring that back. You know, I heard a group of English teachers talking even about the PSATs and reminding the kids as sophomores, saying, oh, you can flag it. If you don't waste a lot of time on it, flag it, and then you know you can go back and answer that question at the end of the test if you still have time. So it's teaching them little strategies as well. It's making sure that kids are still doing lots of reading on computers, doing math on computers, so that we can continue. But I don't know if you would disagree, Brian, but I would say that it's probably not a great predictor.
Okay. And then kind of stepping back from that a little bit, sometimes when you're looking at these cohorts, even adjusting before and after COVID, so no one not crossing over COVID, some of the cohorts appear to swing 13, 14%. Knowing that different grades have different compositions, what have you, how do we explain plus or minus, right? How do we explain 14%? Like, that seems to be a large amount of kids, right? I mean, that's got to be, what, 50, 60 kids or so, give or take?
Are you looking from year to year, or are you looking
So for instance, like the
diagonally?
cohort, where was it? Grade 6 in 2016 is 78%. ELA. And again, I'm just taking this as an example. Next year, they jump to 87%, right? So that's a 9-10% swing. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's talking, if you're going diagonally, if you
I'm
go.
going diagonally.
Yeah, if you
right?
go
So sixth
diagonally.
grade in 2016 would be 7th grade in 2017, right? So like, again, just as an example, that's a 9-10 point swing.
Yep.
Where was the other one?
Well, even just the 23 to 24, you see a growth there too.
Yep, exactly. So, just curious, right? Again, that's, as Matt was kind of alluding to, when you talk about in real kids, real students, 10% of a class is 30, ish, give or take, 30 to 40 kids, and, so you're talking, fair amount of kids, right? 45, 50, that all of a sudden swung up, or sometimes they swing down.
And that's why we do those vertical
Yeah.
scaled scores, because
Yeah.
it is looking at that growth over time. That's why we dive more deeply into those targets for classes, for schools. It really is trying to help individualize as much as possible as we can. Sometimes it's not necessarily a matched cohort either. You do have kids that move into the district that haven't been part of our curriculum over years. So, this is just kind of that quick snapshot of a diagonal. So, I mean, once again, it is just continually diving in, looking at the data, and hoping that every year, based on how we're analyzing the data, based on how we're instructing the kids, that we're hoping to move every child forward. And that's why I always try to bring in those vertical scaled scores, because when you look at just level 3 or level 4, it doesn't really speak to the growth. And so you could have a child who was a level 2 but made 110% growth. That's huge for that child.
Sure.
Or you could have a child who just kind of stayed at that level 3 and didn't really make much growth. That's a concern for us. Yes, they met the achievement goal, and yes, they're going to appear here as one of those 86%, and that's great overall. But that's not where we stop, because then we dive in and we say, why didn't they make growth? What happened? What are we missing? We don't want them to slide further. What can we do differently?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Did I miss something? Do you want to say anything, Sarah? Did I miss something? No?
I have a question.
Oh.
Quickly. I was wondering about the Literacy Academy and the fact that we've had it running for a couple of years now, and whether or not we're starting to see any of the students who've passed through the Literacy Academy start to take the SBAC and ELA, and if we can start to track and compare to maybe previous groups that would have been eligible for it, but we didn't have literacy, or just have a general sense of the impact of the Literacy Academy on our ELA scores.
I think we would want to go back and probably track individuals, but Bill, certainly if you have any information from that perspective.
We're gathering data now, and we're looking at it longitudinally over the last 2 years. This will be our 3rd year of the implementation. you know, it's something that we want to look at and see whether we can, you know, identify the progress that those students are making. The first test, though, is third grade, right? So we may have kids who only started Literacy Academy at third grade, so we still need to, you know, take a look at the data and dig in and see, you know, is it translating to improved scores on standardized tests like this? We know it's contributing to improved scores on the progress monitoring that we're doing with students, but it's a little early to tell how it's going to play out on the standardized scores.
Great.
You would like to hope that those foundational skills get built and become stronger, and then once those foundational skills are in place, it allows you to then introduce that comprehension, and then once they're feeling stronger about that, it allows you to then work with the writing it and putting your answer in writing. So it is kind of a complex process that we're following with the kids, but we would like to hope that those foundational skills are in place, and that's really that whole K to 3, you know, is so critical in making sure that they're really solidified by the end of third grade so that they really can move into the higher level of reading, which is the ultimate comprehension. But do we have kids who still need support? We do, from a fluency and accuracy and vocabulary perspective.
Great.
Sorry, I know you've been asking questions or answering questions for a long time. I have a quick question about these targeted growth and the parents' role in that. So am I correct in understanding, it seems like this data is all kept in for you guys with the administration and data teams and isn't regularly released to parents?
So they receive the Smarter Balanced results, and on that it talks about whether they've moved up in their vertical scaled score.
Okay.
And so a parent will actually see their results from the previous year, and then they receive the results for the current year. So if you're a fourth grader, you would have received results for the 2023, and then you would have received them for the 2024.
Okay.
And so it does show that growth.
And then in your examples, these student A and D who don't have a growth flag of 0, does that trigger a notification to the parents? Like, do you bring them in on that and say, hey, look, you're going to receive these assessments, but your student actually isn't meeting the targeted growth that we had for them? Like, is there a proactive, or does that fall on the parents to proactively reach out to you guys if they see those results and have a question about it?
I think what's important is always to triangulate the data, because we always need to remember that this is just a snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a child who just wasn't feeling that great and didn't do so great. And so it's always going back and looking at all the other data that we have and seeing, are they continually making progress and meeting benchmarks? And if they are, then we obviously wouldn't be contacting parents, because we have other data that's saying that they have been making growth. We have NWEA data, we have unit assessments, we have other data that's saying that the child's been making growth over time.
Okay. And then the last question is, if a parent does want the results or in-depth of this, can they reach out and request that? And is that something that they're are given access to?
So the only thing that the parents have access to is the student data report.
Okay.
So, I mean, could somebody go through the student data report with them and explain the student data report? Of course. Our classroom teachers can do that for them, as well as a reading specialist, as well as an administrator. So anybody can go through the report. The reports are pretty self-explanatory. I'll make a note also for next year to put a snapshot of what one of those student reports look like, so that you have a perspective of that. But they are pretty self-explanatory in that regard.
And is that true across the DIRG? Like, is that how other districts do this, or is this just how we choose to use this data?
You mean the parent reports, or
for the parent, like parent access?
the state generates the reports.
Okay.
So the state generates the reports. They all get sent to my office. They're in boxes. And we have figured a way. The state also allows us to electronically send them. So we do electronically send them to parents, and they get a copy of those. And then we have one that we keep on file here at school. So all the boxes get sent out to the school, and then they put that in. And you can imagine it's a little bit of a process, because our kids have transitioned into new schools, and usually they don't come in until the summertime or early fall. And so it's a matter of making sure that the 8th grade results actually go to the high school and that get in the file there. And that's why we do it electronically for our parents. So they get those copies electronically. But they could always contact the school if they wanted a printed copy.
Great, thank you.
But that's generated by the state.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Brendan, you sure? All right. Just want to make sure. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Crenti, and thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. All right. Next up, statement of accounts with Mr. O'Keefe. Bring us home.
Okay, so this is our first financial report for the fiscal year 24-25. Through September 30th, our operating fund actual is 19.5 million, or 17.8% of our full-year budget of 109.1. An additional $80.8 million, or about 74% of the budget, is encumbered and is mostly comprised of salaries, benefits, utilities, maintenance, contracts, and transportation and out-of-district tuition. The remaining balance of 8.9 is currently unencumbered at this time, and it's made up of salary-related spending that is not typically fully encumbered, such as overtime, stipends, drivers, monitors, and some substitute teachers. As I mentioned, our attainment of budget is 17.8. That compares year to year. Last year at this point, we were at 17.4. So it indicates that our spending rate is slightly ahead of the prior year. It's likely due to some timing differences in property services and supplies. In addition, in salaries, we're continuing to watch driver and bus monitors. If you recall, we ran higher than anticipated in last year's budget. So we're continuing to monitor that. In the grants area, to date, our awarded grants are $2,083,145, with year-to-date expenditures of $121,000, leaving a remaining balance of, as of September 30th, of $1,962,000. Finally, on school lunch, as of September 30th, school lunch revenue totals $373,000, or 12.1% of our budget of $3,086,504, and a year-to-year increase in revenue of 1%. Since we didn't have a price increase, it's all driven by volume. Total expense through September is $305,000, or 10.7% of the budget, and a year-to-year growth of 13.5%. So if you recall, revenue is growing 1%, expense is growing 13.5%, and that's driven by the startup cost of the new school year. Questions?
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then lastly, one more round of comments from the public. Good. All right. Announcements and future business, please. Dr.
Sure.
Lutzy.
Sure. So we have our next meeting in a couple of weeks on November 4th, where we will have our enrollment presentation by Darlene in our Human Resources Department. Quick preview. NESDEC has our kindergarten numbers going up even higher than we had discussed last year for 26-27, so, and beyond. So we'll dig into those numbers and get a sense of where we are with all of that. We may have an executive session after that meeting as well, if contracts are ratified for our secretaries and our food service. So I'm glad to report that we have reached a tentative agreement with both groups. And so now it's in their hands for ratification, and upon ratification, it'll come to the board for review and consideration. And there's lots going on across the district, of course. Our phone-free schools over at Saks continues to work very well. You know, we continue to work out the kinks. It's a brand-new program, but by all reports, it's successful. And so what we're thinking is the second meeting in November, we'll have a team from Saks come and talk about that and give us some feedback about how it's going there. We'll also talk about our innovation program and a few other things that we're doing across the district, artificial intelligence, et cetera. So it'll be an exciting night. That's the second meeting in November. More information to come And of course, between now and then, we have Halloween. We'll have our Halloween parades at all of our elementary schools. Looking forward to all of that, and I know that our principals are planning to sleep very well the night before. And lots of exciting things going on in our district, so thanks.
Cool, thank you very much. All right, guys, can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Laura, second, Matt Campbell, all in favor? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Have a great night.